Maikai, Keala, Kahali, King. Blessed be this day, this place, and all these people gathered here. The topic we have this evening is how to get rid of guilt and shame. So, as we usually do, we're going to start with a story, Hawaiian legend. So, Ikawakahiko, Mamua o Kapenakuke. Once upon a time, a long time ago, long before Captain Cook, there lived on this island a chief, and the chief's name was Kui. And Kui was a very, very strong, powerful chief. He had big muscles, and he was famous all throughout all the islands for his boxing skill. And he was very quick to love. He was very quick to help a friend, but he was also very quick to take offense, very quick to get angry when he thought he was being slighted. He had very strong emotions, and he came up abruptly. In this time we're talking about, Kui was a good chief in terms of administration. And like I said, he was very, very well known. And because he was handsome and because he was so skilled, I said he was famous for his boxing. Would help to understand a little bit about Hawaiian boxing, because it's not the same as what we know of as modern boxing. This was actually practiced in ancient Hawaii. Now, two men would face each other, and they would wear something called a malo, which is sort of like a breechclout, Hawaiian-style shorts. So in that sense, they look like modern boxers. Well, it was different, but anyway, sort of resembled modern boxers. However, they didn't faint. They didn't try to protect their face or with their hands or their body. They didn't have any fancy footwork. They'd stand in front of each other with their fists. They didn't put anything on their fists, like this. And then they just wailed at each other, just as hard as they could, until one of them fell down. And then, of course, the other one was the winner. And Kui, our famous boxer, never lost a battle, never lost a fight. So there were a lot of women who were very interested in him. Some wanted him for a lover, some wanted him for a husband. But he could never quite decide on one for any length of time. Until one day, he met a woman, we'll call her Naniloa. And because she was very beautiful. She was beautiful not only in her body and her face, but in her mind and in her spirit. And Kui fell in love. She fell in love with him because she could see past his outer self and see the real good soul that was inside. So that's what she fell in love with. And they were very happy for quite a while. Unfortunately, as often was the case in those days, and not just those days, but in the court of Kui, there were people who were jealous of him, jealous of his skill, jealous of his looks, jealous of his wife, who was so beautiful. And so after a time, some rumors began to get started. And the rumors were about his wife, that she was being unfaithful with handsome younger chiefs. Well, when Kui first heard this, of course, he wouldn't believe it at all. But time went on, and the rumors kept coming, and finally he began to doubt. Then time went on, and the rumors kept coming, and finally he began to suspect. And then as he began to suspect, he had this anger start to build up inside him, just like a boil, just building up and building up. And outwardly, you couldn't tell, but it was building up inside him. Now, in those days, they used to have, maybe a lot of you, or if not all of you, have heard about a festival called Makahiki. Well, these were very ancient times. So in those ancient times, it was really just kind of a harvest festival, Thanksgiving, getting ready for the new year. They had feasting, they had a few simple games, but nothing like they had in later years. And the story partly tells you why. So anyway, one of the games during a Makahiki festival, Kui was playing konami with his wife. Konani is like a board game, played usually in a square, and it had these little holes instead of marks, and it was played with black pieces of lava and white pieces of coral. And you would jump a piece and you'd remove it from the board. So it was very similar to what we know as chess. So they were playing, and everything was going fine until a young chief, who happened to be handsome, but who was very innocent, came up and he stood beside Naniloa, looking at the board. And this was very common in those days, to kind of kibitz and also to give suggestions. And so he said, well, he pointed at the board and he said, put that one there and remove that one. Wrong thing to say, because there's so much metaphor and so much wordplay in Hawaiian that Ku'i immediately took offense, because to him it sounded like the chief was right in front of him telling Ku'i's wife to get rid of him and replace him with the young chief. And the anger that had been building up just burst. He reached out with one great fist and he hit that young chief and killed him dead on the spot. And everybody was totally shocked. And he shouted at his wife, he said, "That was your lover." And she said, no, I've got no lover but you. And he said, "You're lying." He reached out with his other great fist and hit his wife and killed her dead right on the spot. And then suddenly he realized what he had done. It happens to so many people. They get anger and they let the anger take them over and they do something. And he realized, and he stood up and he went mad with grief. And he tore off his clothes and he ran off into the wilderness. Months and months he was in the wilderness, not hiding, but he was traveling all over the island, and every man he saw, he would challenge him to a fight. He was trying to work off his anger and his anger at himself, which is called guilt. And so he would challenge them, and they would fight, and he killed a lot of people. Even sometimes when they didn't want to fight, he chased them down, forced them to fight. He did this ravaging the countryside for months, until finally, what happened? He found himself, he had just challenged somebody, and they weren't responding, and he was just about to hit them, and finally his Almakua. Now, Almakua is what we call spirit or high self, that good part of everybody that everybody has. Finally, this part of himself was able to reach his heart and open it up in that moment, because all this time he was just so closed. And in this moment, it opened his heart, and with that, his mind opened, and he saw that he was about to kill a young girl who resembled his dead wife. And he fell down on his knees, and he begged her for forgiveness. And one of these things happens sometimes. The girl spoke, but she was speaking the words of Ku'i's own spirit. And she said, "It's not for me to forgive you. It's for you to forgive yourself and make restitution as you can." And he realized the value of those words. He leaped up and he went back to his court, reinstated himself in charge. He immediately began using, because he was a chief and the chiefs always received taxes. He began using almost all of the taxes that he received to make restitution to the families of the people that he'd hurt and the people that he had killed. And he knew it was only not nearly enough, but he did whatever he could to try to do something to make things better. And he was a changed man. He never did marry again, but one of the things he did was he began to extend the makahiki season, which at that time was only just a short thing in October. And he extended to a full 4 months of peace. See, because I didn't mention before this, his religion was for the war god, Ku'ilimoku, war god of the Hawaiians at the time. And he switched his allegiance to Lono, the god of agriculture and peace. And he extended this peaceful season for 4 whole months of the year where there would be no war. And instead of war games like they used to have, they only had sports in which no one was allowed to kill. And so because of that, he did everything he could for the people. He did the games in honor of his wife, because it was through the war games that, his practice with them, that he just automatically reached out and killed her. So he started these games of sports, and no one could be killed. He did that in her honor. And so the people in turn, they honored him. And they honored him by calling him, and the name he's still known by today, Lono Ika Makahiki. Lono of the Makahiki. Pipi Holo, Keika Ao, so runs the story. But what we find in here is a lot of interesting stuff. Some things that can give us clues as to how to get rid of guilt and shame. What I'm going to talk about now is using the Huna knowledge, which is the basis for what we're teaching, and going through the principles and showing different solutions to the whole problem of guilt and shame. Well, the first one that we'll talk about is not exactly the same problem that Ku'i had, or Lono Ika Makahiki. Now we have to give him his proper name. But a lot of people feel guilt and feel shame for something they did that they were told was wrong, that they were blamed for. And what we find is most particularly is in situations where children were abused, and then the whole thing that turned out was blamed. They were blamed for that. And sometimes, unfortunately, they accept this blame and go through their life feeling so guilty for what they've done. When it was done out, when we say abuse, we have to be clear what we mean. We mean when somebody is either forced or intimidated into doing something they don't want to do. Sometimes doing something even they know is wrong, and then blamed for participating in it. And so there's this terrible guilt and shame. Well, since the world is what you think it is, a possibility exists, and usually with help. Some people do it finally on their own. Is to realize that no matter what the other people said, this was not their guilt. This was not their shame. They didn't do that on purpose. They did not create the situation. Changing your mind or changing the interpretation of something that was done is sometimes the most appropriate solution for some people, depending on what it is. That's one thing. The second thing, coming out of our principle, is based on the word kala, which also means forgive. This we saw in the story. Remember when he asked the young girl that he almost killed, he asked her for forgiveness, and she said, no, it's not for me to forgive you. You have to forgive yourself. And it always has to be done this way if there's ever going to be any forgiveness. It doesn't matter if you're feeling guilt or shame about anything. It doesn't matter how many other people forgive you. If you haven't forgiven yourself, you're going to still have the feeling. That forgiveness has got to come from within to be effective. Now, when we say forgiveness, we need to clarify a little bit what we're really talking about. Because it doesn't mean just to say, I'm sorry. It doesn't mean just to say some words, I forgive myself. Forgiveness happens when there has been not just a change in attitude, but a change in feeling. It's got to get at a feeling level, because that's where the guilt and shame are most strongly. Now, it's interesting that from the point of view of Hawaiian tradition, Hawaiian language, for instance, there are words. There's a word for guilt, several words, and there's several words for shame, but not in the sense we use it today. In Hawaiian, guilt is when you're guilty of something. Okay? It's the state of being guilty about something. Got nothing to do with feeling. And we use it so often for that feeling that people have about themselves. That sense did not exist in Hawaii. The recognition that you've done wrong, and like the chief did, and having remorse for something, of course, but not guilt in the same way that we do it today. Shame is the same thing. The basic word for shame in Hawaiian, the shame part, with all the other good that they did, the shame part came from the missionaries. Because the Hawaiians just had a word that meant bashful. And that got turned into the word for shame. And that, even then, it only means to be embarrassed and to want to withdraw because you're so embarrassed. Not the shame that we talk about today. So they didn't have those concepts. But we do have those concepts in the modern world. Forgiveness is the one. Now, forgiveness is when you can change your mind about what happened in such a way that you no longer feel guilty or no longer feel ashamed. People can give suggestions about how to do that, but it does. There may be dozens or hundreds even of techniques, but somehow forgiveness doesn't happen until the feeling changes. So finding some way to do that, one of the ways is to constantly recognize or decide that what you did, I'll give you some other solutions along with that, either wasn't so bad or wasn't bad at all, again, depending on the situation. Or that you've already had enough punishment. I helped a man one time do it this way. He felt very guilty about something. He felt he needed punishment, but he didn't know how to get it because of the situation and who was involved. So I helped guide him through a process where he imagined that he was in court. And he imagined that there was a judge who found him guilty of what he had done. He imagined the judge sentenced him to, I think it was 50 lashes with a whip. And he spread it, that's all in his imagination, okay, but vivid imagination. And he had somebody from the court whip him and feeling that as intensely as he could until he had been beat up enough that his feeling changed. He had received enough punishment, that was over, he could start a new life. That worked for him. See, there's all kinds of different ways. Sometimes you have to go and do something that you feel is worthy enough to make up for what you did. But these, until you can forgive yourself, these are all kinds of things. But if you feel that what you did was unforgivable, I hate to tell you this, but you're lost. Okay? There isn't a solution unless you are willing to move toward or into a state of self-forgiveness. Now, what keeps people going so often on this feeling of guilt and shame is that they keep bringing it to mind. They keep focusing on it and on how terrible it was and how terrible they were. And I remember one man I tried to help. He had smoked for 30 years and finally decided it was a sin in the context of his life. And so he stopped smoking. But that wasn't enough. For 30 years he had been in sin, and stopping wasn't good enough. And he kept thinking about how bad he was because of the past that he had lived like that. There's no way out of that. At some point, that's got to be shifted. The focus has to be shifted, not on what happened, but on what you're going to do now. What's next? How can you live your life from this moment? And that becomes, that can become the most important thing. Now, we talked about the memories and we talked about the past. This is really the real problem with guilt and shame. It's in the memory. Because what happened is over. Gone, done, does not exist. I watched a movie the other night called Time Machine with, I can't remember the man's name. It was an old one. I think it was the first one that was actually made from the Orson Welles books. Not Orson Welles, but H.G. Wells, right. But this guy goes and gets a time machine, and the whole story centers around the idea that his time machine is here in this space and this time, And the only thing that changes is the time. So the machine disappears into the future. However, it's the same space. And this is very common thinking still today about time and space. Okay? That you move into the dimension of time, but the space is still here. So next week, the machine will be back here at the same place. No, folks. It's not the way the world works. This is going to make sense when we start talking about memories. Because we're not standing still. See? First of all, the Earth is moving around 1,000 miles an hour toward the sun. Now, so this spot here isn't going to be in the same place just a few moments from now. Second of all, the whole Earth is moving around the sun. Which means that whatever you did in the past happened in time and space on some other part of the galaxy. Nowhere near here. And of course we have to add, the sun is moving around the galaxy, dragging all the planets with it. That takes us even farther away. And the galaxy's moving now. You see, we're not making fantasy here. We're using physics to help us understand that whatever happened in the past, it's nowhere around. Okay? And there's no way we can get back to it. So it's done. It's over. It doesn't matter anymore. All you got is the memories. And then you can dwell on the memories, but you're not dwelling on the event anymore. The event's gone, dissipated. Doesn't exist for practical purposes. Maybe the light rays that were involved are out there in space someplace, but they're going to be, millions, if not billions, of miles away. There's nothing to relate to except the memory you have. So, some memories are not worth dwelling on. What's much more important, the past is a memory, the future is a guess. This is where life is. So, you did something, what are you going to do now? That's what's the most important part. Okay? What are you going to do now? Now, in the story, which takes us, moving on, what the chief did was the best he could as far as restitution went. There was an old system of, it's called family therapy, but actually it was group therapy because sometimes chiefs would also engage in it. In Hawaii, it was called Ho'oponopono. And there's several variations that exist today, but the primary one that was used by most people always involved not only an admission that one had done wrong, okay, and that was it, okay, an admission that one had done wrong, restitution in whatever practical way was possible, and forgiveness all around. And then at the end of one of these sessions, when all of that was handled, the restitution didn't have to be done immediately, but when it was agreed on, the leader, because it's always done with a leader, the leader would say, e malu. And what that meant was peace. And what that meant was, this is done, this is finished, this is healed, don't ever bring it up again. And that was part of the process, and it worked very, very well for them. Okay? It's something we can think about, adapt, or adopt ourselves today. Once you've realized it's over, once you've decided to change your life, and by the way, there's a great misunderstanding in the English language about a word related to that. The word is repent. To repent does not mean to feel sorry. It doesn't mean that. The basic meaning is to lean in a different direction, which means act differently now. That's what repenting means. And so it goes along with this same kind of idea. You start acting differently. Because what was done was done. Now, you can only do what you can do. There's a wonderful saying in Hawaiian. It's so obvious when you think about it, but sometimes the obvious escapes us, and we need to be reminded. And so there's this little pigeon phrase. It says, if can, can. If no can, no can. You can only do what you can do. What you can't do, you can't do. One of the things we cannot do from the present moment is undo what we've done. We can change our mind about it. We can act differently. We can become different. We can make restitution where that's feasible in some way. Or in some cases, it doesn't have to be to the person or persons who are involved. It can be helping someone else. Okay? And we have that wonderful thing that's still going on in various ways called pay it forward. Somebody does something nice for you, you do something nice for somebody else, and it just goes on throughout the society. Well, we can help other people if we can't do something for the people that we think we have hurt in the past. There's always something, the main point here is there's always something we can do. We are never helpless. No matter what we've done, no matter how we feel about it, we're never helpless and we never have to stay in the same state. Finally, one of the ideas in this knowledge is that there's always another way to do anything. We have some great techniques, and there are others that people have, but there are great techniques that exist that change the feeling in a few minutes or less. So it's possible for someone who has lived many, many, many years with a feeling of guilt, it's possible for that to change in a couple of minutes. These techniques, one of them we have called the Dynamite Technique. We have a little blue booklet that you're welcome to pick up if you haven't already. It tells you how to do the technique for a lot of things. But it's a technique that's based on physiology and psychology. It's not an esoteric technique at all. It helps you change your body and change your mind both at the same time. So I've given you some ideas, given you some possible solutions, talked about the subject, open it up now to discussion, questions, or comments. Maybe other things that I didn't cover you'd like to, how do you deal with this or that? Yes?
You talked about guilt and shame in terms of the past. Would you say a few words about shame, current shame that people might feel about parts of their bodies or about who they are or how they don't fit some model?
Yeah, sure. We're coming into some of the same kinds of things, okay? The problem is that people have made a rule about themselves and about some way they think they should be. Okay? A lot of people think, maybe because of the way they were brought up, or what they told when they were younger, that if you're not perfect, you're bad. Okay? Which is a real shame, because perfection is an illusion. Okay? Nobody can be perfect. Perfect means to reach a state where you never need to change anything again. We have something like that. It's called straight line dead. Okay? So you might call that perfection if you want to. But the kind of perfection where you never make a mistake, there's a way to get there. And I'll share that, because I never make a mistake. I just want you to know that. Okay? I really don't. Sometimes I get results I'd rather not have, but I don't make mistakes. Now what have I done then? What I've done is make a new rule. That no matter what I do, it's never a mistake. Because mistake has the idea, the connotation behind it of bad and perhaps something to be ashamed of because I didn't do it perfectly or whatever it is. Because my body's not perfect or whatever somebody might have in their mind. Or, like you said, doesn't fit the model because the model is supposed to be perfect. Okay? When you got to change the rules. Because the only reason you're feeling unhappy or feeling the shame is because you made up a rule. Or you accepted somebody else's rule. You don't have to do that. This is the rule I'm telling you. Okay? You don't have to do that. You can make up your own rules about who you are, how you look, how you want to look, how you can make up how you should look, but I really recommend against it. We call that shooting on yourself, and it's not a healthy thing to do. If you can drop all the shoulds from your vocabulary, you may occasionally find a time when the word is useful, but most of the time it is not, because most of the time we use it to make ourselves wrong. And if you can start just dropping that word, it would be amazing. So if you say, I should look like her, drop the should. Obviously, you don't look like her, probably, so you just have to say, I don't look like her. That's it, no should. And it changes the meaning and it changes the feeling. It is really that simple if you think about it. Just decide to drop the shoulds. That'll get rid of a lot of that kind of shit. Some people think they have to be a certain way in order to be attractive. I recall a long time ago I was in a workshop and there was a man who was talking about himself, and he had very sharp clothes. He had a Porsche convertible waiting for him outside, and he was talking about how you have to do all of this to get the girls, and he didn't have any girls anyway, and he was all upset. Well, over the course of this particular workshop, which only lasted a few days, something happened to change his feeling about himself, which was the whole point. And when we met after, everybody met after, one of the things he used to say, it was all of this, he says, you have to be perfect, you have to be right, you have to do it right, you have to do it the way they say, and by the way, everybody leave town because the big earthquake is coming. So a few days later, everybody got together. He was dressed much more casually, and he walked on stage very calm, ready to talk to everybody. That was no longer a problem. About having to do the right thing to get the girls. He wasn't obsessed with that anymore. And he said, by the way, forget about the earthquake. Don't worry. What had happened? Something had helped change his self-esteem. Now he had support from the outside, but the support would not have worked unless he had accepted it for himself. So he had changed his idea about himself, changed his rules about himself. And because of that, had no more of this feeling of not being right, not being correct, or having to be like other people expected. It just was no longer an issue for him. Self-esteem is one of the most important things you can develop for helping to get rid of guilt and shame.
Is there a Hawaiian word for self-esteem?
It didn't seem to be a problem in Hawaii. So there were lots of words for esteem, and you could put the words together to mean that, but that was kind of assumed. Yes. Because the big thing was this ohana idea. Everybody was part of the family, and everybody was accepted, unless there was only one thing that was not accepted. And the only thing in the ancient times that could lead to banishment, which was the worst punishment that they could give. And that was if you held a grudge and would not forgive. That was the worst social sin you could do. But that's why they had this whole pono process, to give people an opportunity to get back in harmony with the family. But if somebody refused, the only solution was banishment. And it still wasn't a self-esteem issue. Yes?
It seems that a lot of people, we don't talk about shame in our culture. And in fact, it seems like many people are ashamed of having any form of shame in their lives.
Human beings are so creative. Yes. They can be ashamed of being ashamed.
Yeah.
Yes. Again, this is a very unfortunate fact. And I call it a fact What I call a fact is something that every human being on the planet can experience. That's a fact. Like gravity, electromagnetism, and what I'm about to tell you. Some people will not change until the pain of what they're doing is so great that it's intolerable. And they must do something else. Sometimes it takes a lot of pain of some form or another before people will give themselves permission to change what they're doing. Some people, unfortunately, choose a way out of suicide. That's terrible, but that happens when they block their own mind from any possibilities and cannot see any. Right? But that, fortunately, is not the majority of the population. But people will not, sometimes they will not change what they're doing until the pain of doing it is too much. Then they'll seek something else. Often what they'll seek is help from someone, and that's a good thing. And sometimes they'll find a way to do it for themselves too. Or sometimes they'll get what they need from a book or a movie or something like that. People will take whatever opportunity they can most of the time. But some of them won't change what they're doing until it hurts too much.
You said one word that triggered some thinking in me, and that was that you might have done harm when you were talking about your restitution. And it's got me thinking about mana and people's having accidents, or if you didn't intend to hurt somebody but you accidentally did, wasn't there some subconscious cooperation that people have to be together in this happening? It's not just one person involved.
Yes, however, so what? The point is, here's what matters. What matters is self-responsibility. Okay? Yes, we could say that on some great deep level, all of us are involved in everything that has happened to us and everything that we do. Right? There are no accidents in the universe.
Well,
it doesn't matter.
My question comes in the guilt that somebody might feel like I run over my cat.
Yes.
And I might feel really horrible about that because I did it to the cat.
Yes.
Well, maybe I didn't do it. Maybe the cat wanted to leave this plane and we came together.
Oh, sure, but here's the problem. There's only one problem with that. You don't know.
I know. So get rid of the guilt.
That's right. Get rid of the guilt.
Love the cat and
Love the cat, get rid of the guilt, make another cat happy. Okay. That's what you can do. Right. We highly recommend being careful about making up too much stuff about someone else's motivations, someone else's thinking, someone else's feelings. I know there are people who feel guilty because they think that they've hurt somebody else's feelings. And I've had cases where the other person didn't even know anything wrong was done. And here's this person going off on this guilt trip. Okay? This will come as a harsh thing, I know. But you cannot be responsible for someone else's feelings unless you purposely do something you know will make them feel bad. That's the self-responsibility. You cannot take a responsibility on that you don't have the power to do. Okay? Everybody has their own feelings, their own ways of reaction. This happens to so many people, and some people use it as a manipulation technique for others. Well, you hurt my feelings, therefore you should do this, or you should help me, or you should be nice to me. That's manipulation. If they had their feelings hurt, they decided to hurt their feelings. Like I said, unless you do it purposely. There was a word in Hawaiian for hurting somebody's feelings, but it carries the idea of doing it on purpose, knowing what would hurt that person. That's a whole different thing. Okay? But just because somebody decided to feel hurt because of something you did when you weren't even thinking about them, or even sometimes when you were trying to help them, okay? Don't feel guilty about that. It doesn't make any sense. Okay? You cannot be responsible for how someone else decides to interpret your behavior. Except unless you did it on purpose. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, so you did it on purpose.
Okay. Well, again, this now depends on what you want to do. First question, do you feel guilty about it? Some people
Well, that's where
don't.
we go. Well, yeah, okay. That's usually where we go.
Okay, yeah, some people will. They'll do it on purpose. Why would they do it on purpose? We have two primary motivations in life. We want to connect. This is a primary human motivation. And we want to feel, well, let me make it more so. We want to feel connected. Doesn't matter whether we are now. We want to feel connected. This is why dictators have people standing on the streets with guns behind them, waving at them as they drive by in their car. They want to feel connected, okay? And they want to feel effective. And sometimes when people don't feel effective, they want to feel a little power hit. And sometimes this is why we will purposely hurt somebody, especially when we think we've been hurt. Because we feel so helpless, we've got to do something to get a little bit of self-esteem back. And we do something that's hurtful, but gives us a little power burst. I actually discovered this with my middle son one time. And I was teaching him about, how to be with people and how to act and things like that. And he was talking about wanting revenge against somebody. And I said, you don't really want that. He said, oh yeah. He said, it feels good. Then I realized what he was talking about. Yes, there is that little burst of feel good that goes along with it because it's a power burst. It's very temporary and it creates a lot of tension. May or may not create tension in the other person, but it always creates tension in the person doing it. And even more tension if you feel guilty about it afterwards. Okay? Because think about the story. When Kui was there, that's exactly what he did. Okay? He was so mad and he was so jealous and he felt so helpless. What can he do? Kill him. Okay? Or hit him, actually. That was what he was doing. Which was not a very appropriate thing to do, but in his particular state, that was the only thing he could think of. And felt bad afterwards. Well, what now? When you feel guilty afterwards, that's when you have to forgive yourself for needing that feeling. Because that's all it was. Forgive yourself for needing that feeling. And then find other ways to get that feeling in a more positive way, so you don't have to do those kinds of things. That would be the healthy approach.
How do you determine whether you hurt someone?
Well, like I said, you don't know unless you've purposely done it and seen the results.
Well, what do you classify as that? I mean, if there's no mistakes or accidents in the universe, can you really hurt someone?
Well, sure, it's easy. If you know you can hurt somebody emotionally on purpose when you know their sensitivities. You can hurt somebody physically, of course.
Right.
Right?
It's easy to see.
Sure. But you can hurt them emotionally when you know their sensitivities. If you know the areas that they are likely to respond to. This is especially true in close relationships. And it's terribly true in close relationships where people feel either rivalry or insecurity in relation to each other. And you see all these little power plays between them, okay? Hurting each other. I can remember, and it's what breaks up most relationships. Some people do it with criticism. Okay? So there's a good example. I remember a couple that I was helping who were young and said they loved each other. Well, they're very, very much, but they were drifting apart emotionally and didn't understand why. So I talked to them for a while, and they told me that they had this game that they played. We've had it in the military, some people call it dozens. But it basically consists of criticizing each other and trying to find a criticism that would hurt the other person as a kind of a game, a one-upmanship type of thing. And there's a case of purposely finding something that would make the other person feel bad, make them feel hurt. Right? And they loved the game. They played the game. And I told them what the effect was, how it was affecting their emotions, how it was affecting their bodies, and that if they wanted they could bring their relationship back to a fully loving state and go on from there if they give up that game. And they left the office, and about a week later, they told me no, they enjoyed the game too much. And 2 months later, they were divorced. Okay? Because you cannot keep criticizing and maintain a healthy relationship. It can't be done. The bodies don't want to be near each other anymore. Okay? Because of the tension, the energy and physical. The responsibility is in the person who's doing the purposeful criticizing. Okay? Now, a person may or may not feel guilty about that. But that's where the responsibility is. The other person, they are responsible for getting out of there or changing how they react to things. That's their responsibility, which they may or may not do. Okay? But each one has their own responsibility, area in which they can respond effectively. Yes?
About collective guilt, where
in this system that we're talking about, we have an idea that all power comes from within, and there ain't no such animal as collective guilt. A lot of people can feel guilty about the same thing, but said in this way, collective guilt is usually thought of as a state of guilt, how can I put it, that exists with a particular group of people.
I talk about the human race. I find myself feeling responsible and guilty for inhumane treatment of animals.
Okay.
I cannot kill the pigs on my property.
Let's look at this. Let's look at this. It's very good, important to look at. It comes back to what we were just saying. You are creating a responsibility that does not exist. The reason I say it does not exist, we're talking about feeling responsible. It's a good intention, but feeling responsible for cruelty to animals that exists in the world, or the way some human beings act toward each other. Okay? You can't feel responsible for that. I mean, you can feel responsible for that, but it's self-generated because you can't be responsible. You can't go out there and change the behavior of all those people. What you can do is what you can do, which means you could set up an animal shelter, or you could contribute to one. You could write articles. You could help make good behavior known to more people. A lot of things you could do. But to feel responsible for what someone else does that you can't control, feeling guilty about that doesn't really make any sense. It doesn't help you, because what happens so often when people feel guilty in this way, it paralyzes them and prevents them from actually doing anything productive. I'm not saying this is always the case, but some people are able to do something but still feel guilty. The guilt is totally unnecessary and unhelpful. Changing the situation is a good thing to do. You don't have to feel guilty to do that. That's what we're trying to get across.
You make it sound as though original sin doesn't count for anything.
I have no comment on that. Outside of my realm of expertise. What I will comment on for everyone, including the cowboy, is that there are ways to get rid of shame and guilt, ways that are effective. You do not have to live with it. Now I can answer this.
In European culture, babies are a product of sin. In Hawaiian culture, was there known mistreatment of babies such as that when they grew up they would feel shameful or everything? Okay.
Babies were honored, young children were honored, they were part of the family, they were incorporated into the family activities as soon as they were able. There were certain kinds of, you could call them initiations if you wanted to, like when a boy was able to walk on his 2 feet, then he would go and live with the men in the men's house. He would still come back, but he would always eat with the men from that point. Because in old Hawaii, they had a religious system in which it was forbidden for men to eat with women. And so, but he was welcomed into the men's house as a man. Okay. Give you one example. King Kamehameha, the first, who the one who united all the islands, was very interesting in some ways, like Ku'i that we just talked about, because he had the war god all during the time that he was conquering the islands, and then he dropped that, became peaceful, which is the only reason the islands stayed united. But he was not a top-ranking chief in the hierarchy of the aristocracy, and he was about upper middle. And he married a wife who was very high-ranking, and their first son, who was Liholiho, was a little bit down from the wife, but above the father. And because of that, every time that Kamehameha went to where Liholiho was as a child, a little baby, why, he had to lay down. He had to lay down on his back because Liholiho had a kapu, it's called, a sacred formality, that he always had to be higher. And so Liholiho would come out and jump up and down on his daddy, and the king had to take it. Okay. There was another interesting story. It had to do with something like this, but it was written by a missionary who was walking along, riding along a path, and he saw this family. And this was not a royal family. He saw this family. All their goods were outside the hut, the main hut, and they were eating out there. And he looked over in the doorway, and there's this little kid sitting in the doorway. Looked like about 4 or 5. And he stopped, and the missionary asked the father, he said, "What's going on? Why are you all out here?" He said, "Oh, the kid's angry, he kicked us all out." He said, "You let the child kick you out, so you all have to be out here?" And the man laughed, and he says, "Oh yeah, he'll get over it." Now we'll go back in. Children were highly honored, typically, in Hawaiian society. Integrated into everything that was done. So they didn't have the same kind of problems. They're letting the word for abuse in the sense that we use. Was not a perfect society. No society is perfect. They had lots of different kinds of problems that they had to deal with. They had many different things. So it was not what we would think of as a paradise. There were good chiefs and there were bad chiefs. There was famine, there was disease. They were human beings. But they had some things that socially that were very, very worthwhile.